Astrotometry log. It is March the 11th, 2011. It's approximately 2250 UTC at the time of this recording. This is a follow-up on the analysis of the earthquake that was forecast based on this coronal hole. And I wanted to go ahead and align the changes in the coronal hole with the events that we've seen unfolding in Japan. And if you look at the development of this hole, it is fairly rare for a coronal hole to close completely before it goes over the limb. And this particular hole has one really large shift in the structure, which just passed. It's going to turn back around and go the other way here. And what you'll see is right here, this part of the hole opens suddenly. You see that open? And then it closes back up very quickly. Now, in astrotometry, this is understood to be associated with the carrier that moves the Earth's physical matter through time. And so what we're seeing is a out-of-phase relationship that changes fairly quickly over time. And this is probably the larger part of the seismic event. That is probably the part of the hole, the part of the wind stream that is associated with this event. And so I'm looking at how this hole changes after that part. After the big part here, it closes up fairly quickly. And then in astrotometry, that closure is also associated with seismic activity. And so there's this big movement here, and then the whole thing rather quickly closes up. And so this is probably the reason that the event happened after the solar wind stream than before it. And as I mentioned before, these events usually occur directly before or directly after the solar wind stream that's associated with the coronal holes. And in this case, we're still seeing a lot of very, very strong activity. And the 8.9 earthquake that was recorded on the 11th at 5:46 has been followed up by many strong events. And there have been several foreshocks for this event, starting with this 7.2 near the east coast of Honshu, Japan, the day before. And so we had this event the day before, and then a lot of very significant activity. And this activity is continuing, and I'm trying to figure out, based on the movement, what we're seeing here, what these particular events align with as far as the features, because these are foreshadows, hypertime foreshadows of the inconsistencies in the Earth's translation through time. And so you've got this hole that closes up rather quickly, and it looks like there could be quite a bit more seismic activity. Now, I don't see another event like the 8.9. I'm not ruling that out as a possibility. There's been a lot of other strange things that have been happening with the solar cycle. See, that's the event right there. I think that was the main event. And you see after that it just all closes down. And so if you look at it reverse time, if you think about how it would be opening, you've got this quick opening right there, which is sort of like the end of the event, and then that's the 8.9 right there. And so you've got the other events, the 7.2 right here, and then that was a fairly small quake, and then The day later, blam, right there. And then that's the aftershocks right there. There was some question about whether or not the watch had been extended, and honestly, I thought that we sort of dodged a bullet on this. The solar X-ray activity was fairly high, and I thought that maybe we dodged a bullet. I wasn't going to say that we're completely out of danger on it because of this known pattern that these events occur before or after the solar wind. Now, in the solar minimum, the last many forecasts that I've made, I've always called the beginning of it, because this pattern where it shows up after the solar wind has not been present. And I suspect this has something to do with the increase in the solar activity. We've seen a sharp increase in solar activity in the past month. And this is something that I was concerned about. I was concerned about the solar cycle starting up suddenly after having been dead for such a long time. And I was concerned about the effect that it would have on the core to suddenly heat up without the proper amount of time for the expansion of the plate seams. That would be the three-dimensional version of the model. But in any case, we have seen several events that were associated with this after period right here. And so, for future note, if I don't specify and there is a watch going on, it's not over until approximately a day after the solar wind speed returns to normal. And these events, if you look at where they're occurring in different places now. It's gone up. And so we were seeing the 8.9 down here, and now we're seeing a 6.6 up here. And so there is this transposition in the position of the quakes, the aftershocks, that is, in a sense, mirroring this activity, this coronal hull activity. And I'm hoping that this is the end of it, but the hopes don't usually trump the science on this. And so we have this activity that's going on up here. That might be the 6.6 there. Hopefully, we're looking at the end, but it's not. I can't say for sure that it's over, but it does look like that would have been the 6.6, and then this would have been the 8.9. The 7.2 being this right back here, perhaps. This is in progress stuff here. It's so vital, I think it's important that I share it in this way at this time. Another factor that affects this is that we did see a really, really large coronal mass ejection on the 8th. On the 8th, we saw a huge coronal mass ejection associated with a near X-class flare on that day. And I'm suspecting that there will be a fairly large tropical cyclone that forms out of this particular coronal mass ejection. This ejection has the signature of a Category 4, possibly Category 5 tropical cyclone. And so I'm not sure where that's going to form. It's possible that this is the beginnings of it right here. In this case, it would be a typhoon. It's less likely that it's this out here. NRL is not tracking anything in this area right now, but they are tracking this in the Atlantic. And so I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be Atlantic. It looks like it's going to be the Southern Hemisphere based on where this is. Now, if this was close to the limb, this could be transposed into the other hemisphere. But I'm pretty sure it was on this side of the solar limb. We're definitely not out of the woods as far as the solar activity and influence. We are seeing some fairly significant geomagnetic activity still right now, and that may continue for a while. Again, we had this really large coronal mass ejection, and so whatever shock was present from this geomagnetic activity may have been extended out. There may have been an extension of the influence from this out into space, pushed by the coronal mass that came after it, that came behind it. And so it may spring back, sort of like a magnetic shock, and there could be more of these events. In astrotometry, these events are understood to be electrical in nature. They're understood to be the breakdown of the carrier that moves matter through time-space. And so this is sort of like an electrical storm underneath the ground that is triggered by these electromagnetic disturbances in the carrier that creates what we perceive as solid matter and photons. And so the solar wind is a very good indicator for activity with high energy protons. It looked like it was returning to normal, but now it's started to head back up a little bit. But under the circumstances, having there been this very large coronal hole, we have to keep an eye on this, considering the period in which the solar cycle is in, this starting up period. And so if this was the 7.2 activity, and then this is the 9.8 activity, and then we see the other activity, the 6.6 activity here, we could be out of the woods on this, but there's no guarantee on that. That is highly speculative, and hopefully Japan will get some break here, because this is just an absolute tragedy, and my heart goes out to everyone there. Again, I wish that it would have been possible to forecast this. Unfortunately, there's another large coronal hole that is forming in the southern hemisphere on the sun, and I will be doing another watch soon, and so possibly another quake coming up on the 12th, possibly the 13th, or approximately 6 to 7 days after that, in the case that the event happens coincident with the end of the solar wind. Thanks for watching.